All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's NDPA webinar on state and federal water safety legislation. My name's Adam Ketchmarchi. I'm the Executive Director of the National Drowning Prevention Alliance. We're so lucky to be joined by leading experts on legislation today. They'll be introducing themselves shortly. Attendees can participate in today's webinar by using the chat and question and answer functions at the bottom of your screen. I'll be monitoring those throughout the panel discussion, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible before time runs out. Before we get started, I would like to take time to thank our sponsor for today's webinar, D&D Technologies. D&D has been a longtime supporter of the NDPA. We thank them for their loyalty, sponsorship, and partnership. As a reminder, all previous webinar videos, as well as today's, are posted on ndpa.org/webinars. Those are free viewing at any time on ndpa.org. I'd now like to ask the panelists to join me live on screen, and we'll get them introduced for today's webinar. All right, let's start with Alan Korn. Alan, can you hear me?
I can.
All right, we can't see you yet. Can you turn your video on?
Yes.
Bottom right-hand corner, left-hand corner.
Okay. It says the host has stopped it.
Oh.
I think you have to.
Well, Alan, go ahead and start introducing yourself, and I'll work on that function.
Okay, very good. My name is Alan Korn. I'm the Executive Director of the Abby's Hope Charitable Foundation. And I've been working for that organization for about 5 or 6 years. Prior to that, I was the Executive Director and General Counsel for the Safe Kids Worldwide campaign, or the U.S. program for that organization. And I've spent my entire life, most of my professional career, working on behalf of children, helping to prevent injuries and health issues. And despite a short stint, 7 or 8 years practicing law in a courtroom, just like you see on TV, or almost just like you see on TV, I've done most of that effort since then has been working with Capitol Hill, the federal agencies, and other government entities to help protect children. And I guess the theme of this year's, or this particular component, or this particular presentation is state and federal legislation. And I thought what we would do to start is just give you, and I've done this before, some of you may have heard it, but I thought I'd give you the cliff notes for what goes on Capitol Hill and the federal agencies. We've got other speakers that are going to talk about state, although I will mention it briefly in passing here. And I'll do this pretty quickly. But the United States Constitution articulates 23, some say 26, specific powers under Article 2 of Congress, 4 of which have to do with injury prevention. And those 4 are listed right there on that slide as you see it. There is an authorization power. That's giving power to agencies or organizations to do the work on behalf of the federal government. The most applicable example is Congress authorizing the Consumer Product Safety Commission, that's an independent agency here in Washington, D.C., to work on behalf of children, and in this case, to work on behalf of drowning prevention and protecting kids in and around pools and spas. Again, I'm going to do this very quickly because we want to get to what's going on in the federal government right now. And there's a lot going on, despite what you're reading in the paper or watching on your cable news networks. So the first power is an authorization. Again, that's Congress telling an independent agency or a department, like the Department of Transportation or CDC, to do something on behalf of, in this case, children and drowning prevention. They, of course, have the power of the purse. That's the second power, and that's in appropriations. We're going to talk about what's going on Capitol Hill right now as it relates to appropriations and the Pool Safely campaign of the Consumer Product Safety Commission. That's basically, one, giving power to Congress, to organizations like agencies. Two is giving them money or not giving them money to not do certain things. So they control the power of the purse. That's a specifically articulated power in the United States Constitution. And the other is the most obvious of the authorities of Congress, and that's to legislate, like the passage of the Virginia Graham Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act, or the Bike Helmet Safety Act of 2004, or the Child Safety Protection Act. That was the toy safety piece of legislation that passed in the mid-2000s. So that's the how a bill becomes a law, schoolhouse rock power of Congress. And of course, it is given to Congress through Article 2 of the Constitution. The fourth is an oversight. And every once in a while, or more than every once in a while, in fact, much of what you read in the paper is an oversight power where Congress can call in the administration, an independent agency like the CPSC, the Federal Trade Commission, the Securities Exchange Commission, the National Transportation Safety Board, any one of those agencies to police, for lack of a better word, what's going on there. And sometimes it's a result of kids dying as it relates to the CPSC or the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Two quick examples were one that's quite applicable to our discussion today. In a period of about 18 months, 3 kids died entrapped in a bottom of a pool or at a wading pool. And I'll talk about them again briefly in a sec when we get to the specifics. But Congress said, hey, what the hell's going on over there at the CPSC? Why do I have constituents, or why do I have our American citizens, in particular children, dying at the bottom of pools because of drains? So the Virginia Graham Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act, which we will talk about, which is an example of the third power I list there, all started with the oversight authority of the CPSC. I mentioned 2 examples. If those of you are old enough to remember, and many of you are, I'm sure, in the early 2000s, late 1999, some kids were being killed by airbags in cars. They were coming out of the dashboard way too aggressively. In fact, one child was actually decapitated. I'm sorry to put that visual in your head. And Congress used its oversight, eventually its legislative and appropriations power, to fix that problem in partnership with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. So it's quite an important power and one we see regularly. Just recently, the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives called the Consumer Product Safety Commission into the hearing room and said, tell us what's going on. We have some issues, some of which you may have read in the news related to baby sleepers and strollers, jogging strollers. Tell us what's going on over there. How can we do better? Agencies, you should be doing better. And so that just happened within the past 3 or 4 weeks. The second component there, and I'm going to move quickly here, is the regulatory independent agency, federal agency aspect of Washington, D.C., of the federal role in injury prevention. And in this case, it's the Consumer Product Safety Commission. They do education, they police the marketplace for dangerous products. When they find them, they recall them. Sometimes they see customs, patterns, practices where they feel they need to craft and enforce regulations. For instance, baby cribs or bike helmets, something like that. And they also do data collection. I'll mention that education role in part is the Pool Safely campaign, for which the federal agency, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, does quite a bit to educate consumers, pool and spa owners, pool and spa technicians and service providers about injury prevention. I'll take it to the next slide. I will say one thing, then get on to the nitty gritty, because I only have about 20 or 25 minutes and I've already made a dent in that. Just the difference between federal and state. You're going to hear from some experts on state legislation, in particular in New Jersey, in just a few minutes. But basically the federal government's role in influencing our lives is basically contained in the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution. If you were to read the 10th Amendment, you wouldn't make heads or tails of it. I didn't either. It took me an entire year of law school to figure out how the Bill of Rights works with the Constitution to affect our daily lives. But the 10th Amendment basically says, if it ain't specifically said in the Constitution, it's up to the states. That's where you hear the concept of state rights. So unless it is mentioned, it's up to the states. And the way that is demonstrated or effectuated in injury prevention or drowning prevention is the federal government, in this case, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, can affect the products themselves, making a bike helmet safe, making a child safety seat safe, making sure it can survive crashes, and making sure smoke alarms go off at a certain level, or carbon monoxide detectors are particularly sensitive to a certain level. That's all the federal government's role, is to make sure these products that we put into the stream of commerce are safe. For the most part, it is up to the states. There are exceptions, one contained in the VGB, to use those products is a state rights, is up to the state. So bicycle helmet use laws, life jacket use laws on state property, child safety seats, smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, that's a state's issue. Making sure they're good and they do what they're supposed to is up to the CPSC. The rest of it, as to use and programming around these topic areas, is up to the states. And I think we're going to hear about one of those pieces of legislation in a few minutes. I'll move on. I'm sorry for the disturbing picture, but it kind of shows what happens when a child is entrapped in the bottom of a pool. And I show it because there were 3 kids who died all within 18 months. Abby Taylor, Abby's Hope Charitable Foundation, Graham Baker, the Baker family, if those of you who know who Secretary of State James Baker is, it's his granddaughter, and Nancy Baker's daughter, Graham Baker, died at the bottom of a pool. And there was a third named Zachary Cohen from Greenwich, Connecticut, who died also from an entrapment in the bottom of the pool. It was a perfect storm, an unfortunate storm, but Congress said, hey, like I said before, what the hell is going on? We need to do something about it, which resulted in the Virginia Graham Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act. This is the first piece of legislation ever in the history of our country that specifically addresses pools and drowning prevention. I will go through the requirements quickly. The Consumer Product Safety Commission enforces this piece of legislation. They were authorized to do so in the legislation, and it basically has 5 or 6 particular requirements. Number 1, it makes sure that it is now illegal to use dangerous drains in any public pool in the country, and I'll talk about public pools in just a sec. So you know those flat drains. I don't know, Adam, if I'm on the video. I think I am, but I'm not positive. All I see is my presentation. But just in case, I'm holding up a dangerous drain. But I'll describe it. It's a flat drain that is flush to the bottom of the pool. And those are now illegal to sell in this country. Instead, you could only sell safe drains, which are rounded. I kind of describe it this way. If you could stub your toe on the drain of the bottom of a pool, shallow end, wading pool, in a spa, it's probably a safe drain. they're kind of rounded. They're like a bump on the bottom of the pool. So that's number one. That piece of legislation said you cannot sell the dangerous ones in this country anymore, and you have to be able to only sell the safe ones, which is a standard with the help of the Consumer Product Safety Commission as to what a safe drain is. Number two is it requires the use of that particular safety product, despite what I just said before about the 10th Amendment, in public pools. There's no requirement in this piece of legislation for them to use in residential pools, despite the fact that the physics are exactly the same when it comes to water in a private pool as it is in a public pool. However, because of the 10th Amendment, the Virginia Graham Baker requires their use in public pools. And public pools are defined in a very broad manner. If it is not in your backyard, it is probably a public pool. That includes hotel pools, that includes summer camps, that even includes private country clubs, even though it's got the word private in it. You have to have the safe drain cover. Third, you have to build pools going forward in a certain way. Now, I'm not going to go into the details because this presentation or the timing doesn't allow for it. I'm happy to answer questions about it at the end. I want to be respectful of our other presenters, but moving forward, all new pools have to have several things done to them that will prevent entrapment. And everything from using the drains in public pools, the safe drains, to requiring 2 drains at the bottom of the pool as opposed to 1. One drain at the bottom of the pool attached to 1 pump is an extremely dangerous situation. So Congress, in working with experts and the CPSC, Consumer Product Safety Commission, decided that going forward, all public pools have to have at least 2 drains. So if one is covered, you still have the suction flow going through the system. There are other requirements, technical requirements of the VGB, and like I said, I'm happy to do a little primer on that offline or at the end of the presentation. And the final thing I want to mention about the Virginia Graham Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act, by the way, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see Secretary of State James Baker and Nancy Baker. It was their granddaughter and daughter that died, and that, of course, is President Bush, and that's a much skinnier Alan Korn on the left. The VGB established and implements the Pool Safely campaign, which is the education component of the Virginia Graham Baker. And it's not just entrapments, it is drowning and entrapments and all water safety. And they do quite a good job, which leads me, here's some pictures of safe drains and some other safety devices that are required by the VGB, which we'll get to later if there's time. I wanted to end on this particular point to get to our other concepts. There are 2 things pending right now on Capitol Hill that relate to drowning prevention. One of which is the second bullet, I'll start with that one, is funding for the Pool Safely campaign. And the House Appropriations Committee has finished their work. The entire House has not, but there is going to be a chunk of change similar to what there has been in the past, somewhere between $600,000 and $1 million to implement the Consumer Product Safety Commission's Pool Safely campaign. It'll probably be on the lower end of that. That's Congress appropriating money to the CPSC. And they've also appropriated $1.3 million, or requiring the CPSC to use $1.3 million to implement the grant program, which is something we didn't discuss here, but is a component of the Virginia Graham Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act. The grant program was meant to incentivize, through grants, states to do for residential pools what the Virginia Graham Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act does for public pools. Kind of an incentive to help prevent entrapments and to use all the safety devices that we know work. Let me mention this briefly. since the enforcement date of the Virginia Graham-Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act, there's not been a single entrapment death in this country, and now we're going on 11 years. I think it's been 11 years. So this is an example of my federal government working on behalf of people in a bipartisan sense. Despite what you're reading in the paper, we can get some good things done through the federal legislative process. Then the last thing, and I'll turn it over to our next speakers, is there is a piece of, in the appropriations bill, a separate appropriations bill, there's some CDC research funding for fiscal year 2020. It is pending. It is not passed. In fact, both of these are pending. Actually, it says $20 million. It should say $2 million. Please note that that is a mistake. $2 million to do CDC research for drowning prevention. And they'll get that grant of money if it makes it through the full House, Senate committees in the Senate, probably sometimes in the fall. I don't expect it'll be controversial, but who the heck knows? And I think that's it. That's my cell phone number, and I put my personal email there for you. If you have any questions after the fact, or if I can help you with a legislative question or concern or effort, by all means, it's my pleasure.
Thanks, Alan. Before we turn it over, just one question that came in just for clarification. When you say the word police, as far as maybe CPSC is concerned, an attendee submitted a question asking if there was any difference in meaning between police and their regulatory obligations.
Yes, there is. The regulatory obligation is establishing a standard for, let's say, bike helmets or Barbie dolls or cribs. The slats can only be so far apart. There can be no finials on cribs anymore. Those are the cutout designs in the headboard and the footboard of cribs, along with a whole lot of other things. That's the regulatory power. Excellent question. The police power, which I'm a little reluctant to use it in that way because it has some nefarious connotations, it's really the recall power. The CPSC has the ability to go out to the marketplace and check drains, check cribs in daycare centers, at Walmarts, at Targets, bike helmets at a Walmart store to make sure they are compliant with the federally mandated standards. And that's what I mean by policing the marketplace.
Excellent. Thanks for clarifying that, Alan.
Sure.
And I'm sure we'll bring you back into the discussion later when we get to our question and answer section. So I'd now like to turn it over to our folks in New Jersey. This is kind of an interesting webinar mixing federal and state legislation, but there is a very, very interesting bill being proposed in the New Jersey state legislature. And it was something we wanted to make our following and our audience aware of, and hopefully they can learn, and this can become a model for the rest of the country. So I'd like to introduce Joe Oehme and I believe Kean. Kate is Assemblyman Sean Kean, who's one of the sponsors of the bill in New Jersey, his chief of staff. Joe and Kate, can you start off telling us a little bit about yourselves, and then we'll get into the breakdown of the law?
Hi, I'm Joe Oehme. I'm the owner and founder of New Jersey Swim Schools, Inc., and I've been teaching swimming for about 30 some years now, and we have 5 swim locations here in Jersey, and we teach from the top of the state down to Ocean County. And we work also I'm a board member for Stop Drowning Now, which is a national 501c nonprofit organization where our mission is to save lives through water safety awareness. And that's why I'm here.
Kate, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Kate Kannberg. I'm Chief of Staff for Assemblyman Sean Kean, who represents the 30th District in New Jersey. And the 30th District comprises towns that are along the beach. So this is obviously an issue that's very important to the Assemblyman, and some unfortunate drownings came up, and that's why he introduced the legislation.
Excellent. So let's kind of go through what this legislation is, what it would mean for New Jersey, and how it would change things.
Sure. So the bill requires each school district to incorporate instruction on water safety into the health education curriculum for grades K through 12. It does spell out a few items that need to be addressed. It really leaves the majority of the information up to the New Jersey Department of Education to decide.
Excellent. And I see we have another representative from New Jersey who's joined us.
Hi.
Hi there.
I don't know. Is this working?
It is. We can hear and see you.
Okay. I've never done this before.
First time for everything. Well, thank you for joining us. And could you give us a little bit about your background, how you got involved with the legislation? And we just, for your knowledge, had Kate and Joe introduce a little bit about themselves, and Kate was just going over a little bit about the bill. Oh, can you hear me?
It froze.
Oh, can you hear me now?
You're back now. Yeah.
Okay. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with the legislation? And Kate and Joe just went through and introduced themselves, and Kate was just walking us through some of the introductory pieces of the bill.
Froze again.
Oh. Okay, Kate, I'll turn it back over to you and Joe for a moment. Can you tell us a little bit of the history of the legislation and how it got started?
Sure. So Assemblyman Kean first introduced the bill in 2017, and unfortunately, 2 girls drowned in one of our towns. They were at an unguarded beach at the time, and they passed away. And that summer, also, there were a few other local drownings and close near misses. Some people were very lucky to be alive. So at that time, Assemblyman Kean was thinking, how can we bring more attention to water safety? How can we teach these important lessons that you don't go swimming at an unguarded beach or pool? So the idea of water safety came up. So he held a meeting with local lifeguards, teachers, water safety experts. It was like a roundtable discussion with many people. And our office was contacted by a number of people who wanted to be involved and felt strongly about it. And after that meeting, Assemblyman Kean thought a good first step would be to incorporate water safety into the health curriculum for all kids, not just kids who live at the beach.
I know in kind of getting ready for this webinar, we started to discuss this, but this is the bill's maybe second time coming up through the process? Is that correct?
It is. So it was first introduced in 2017, and the bill was heard in committee at that point. It was actually combined with a similar bill, but that legislative session was ending, so the bill didn't move forward. So in the current session, it was reintroduced, and it was referred to the Assembly Education Committee, but it hasn't moved yet.
Okay. I hear this a lot from, and I'll just go ahead, and I was going to do this at the end with our question and answer session, but one of the things that I hear from so many of our members and partners of NDPA who have been down the road of state legislation before have found it difficult, and I know each different state has their own nuances and their own politics at play, but what would you tell someone who's considering advocating for legislation in their state with water safety, even if they've maybe put something up in the past and it hasn't made it through committee or gotten a vote on the floor?
Sure. Can I send it to the Assemblyman or no?
Sure. Yeah, I think it looks like he's back with us.
Yeah.
Unmute.
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, and I signed onto the bill. I saw what had happened in Assemblyman Kean's district. There's 3,500 preventable deaths from accidental drownings, 5th leading cause of accidental deaths in the United States. And if this is something that by ensuring that this is part of the curriculum and that the basics are something that our kids can understand, it sort of seemed like a common sense measure, but I credit the primary sponsors for bringing this issue to the forefront, based on the tragic incidences in their district. What was the second question?
We've had a lot of our members and partners of our organization who have been part of advocating for legislation, maybe in their own states with water safety. And one of the things that I hear most often from them is, it's tough to get a meeting with a representative or get the process started, or we got the process started and the bill may have died in committee, or maybe didn't get the vote on the floor, and they're frustrated, to get it back in that process. So what would you say to someone who has, tried to advocate for legislation, but maybe hit some roadblocks along the way?
Sure. Squeaky wheel gets the grease, number one. Just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you. The folks that are frustrated, they're on the right side of history because they're taking a role. They want to advocate in the process. The process isn't working as quickly as they wish it would, as quickly as I bet Kate and the Assemblyman and I all wish it would sometimes. But at the end of the day, they have to stay in the faces of their local legislators. They have to ensure that others who are interested in this issue are bringing it to the attention of their local legislators. And strength in numbers, it will see action through the committee. This is a no-brainer. This should not be a controversial measure. It's just a matter of making sure that it gets to the floor for a vote, that it gets through committee. So I think if they keep reminding their respective lawmakers to join us on this initiative, it'll happen.
That's great. Thank you. So I'll kind of open this up to all three of you from New Jersey who are joining us. Can you walk us through, if this new legislation gets implemented, what it will mean for schools, and how will the schools go about teaching water safety, what resources are available for them, and what this will look like at full implementation?
I'll take this one. Yeah, so through Stop Drowning Now, we just introduced a 22-hour online curriculum that's available for educators to be instituted in the classrooms. We're rolling this out this year. We have some schools on board nationally. Oklahoma is one, in Florida, and also in Connecticut, New York, and now in New Jersey. We're introducing the curriculum so that the teachers, as a free service to the schools, we do look for a donation back to the organization so that we can help fund this programming. We are looking for the data. We want to know that the impact that we can provide, giving children this information at their fingertips and hopefully bringing it home. There is a parent resource as well. Getting the whole family involved in it will dramatically decrease this tragedy. As Assemblyman Mukherjee was saying, drowning is the #1 cause of accidental death for kids under 4. We know that. We've been reactive to these with this legislature. We're hoping that our place in the schools will give us a proactive approach to prevent this in the future. So being in front of these kids and giving them the tools that they need. And in many cases, we're fortunate to be living along the coastline. We have many pools. There are many inner cities and places where they don't get the education. It's not table talk, so to speak, water safety. So we're going to put this in the hands of the educators and hopefully be able to support it with the curriculum.
Awesome. Another question, I guess think about this legislation, more and more that I learn about it, one of the things that got me really, really excited, given my education background and working in schools, was that this law just doesn't go after the K through 5 or the K through 6. This is a K through 12 bill, to my understanding. So it actually would implement education requirements for surrounding water safety for those teenage population that we see have a higher increase risk of drowning when they hit those later teenage years, especially in open bodies of water. Go through any, whether it's our Assemblyman joining us or Kate or Joe, any of the reasoning why you decided to add that in, or what that piece will look like in those higher grades.
I can jump on that one. Yeah, we just lost a 15-year-old boy in Bricktown, which is in our area here on the Jersey Shore, and I don't think drowning has any age. There's no age restrictions for sure. We're seeing it, and we're seeing these children, and the two deaths that Kate was talking of were also 8th grade children, 13 and 15, I believe, and we want to be able to educate them as well. These kids, and I have a 15-year-old daughter as well, and they start to go to the beach, to the pools on their own without supervision. We're seeing this. We want to give them that second chance to think before they act. So through Stop Drowning Now, we do education for mainly the preschoolers, but we are incorporating it into the older grades as well for open water, rip current, knowing the tides, knowing the weather, things like that, what situations that they should be aware of before entering into an open water situation. And for Stop Drowning Now, our curriculum is based on what we call the Safer 3, which is safer water, meaning that all water can be a little bit safer, and having signage, safety equipment, always swim near a lifeguard, make sure that gates are self-latching at your backyard pool. Safer people, meaning that we believe that drowning is preventable and that all children should learn how to swim. That's the number one, part of that. Safer people. And safer response, working with our EMTs and our local responders, teaching kids to dial 911, teaching parents water safety, staying off their phones. We're seeing studies coming out with cell phone usage and drowning, and also just teaching parents how to do basic rescue. So the Safer 3 is an important part of the curriculum that we've incorporated into the schools already. In New Jersey, we've been to over 100 preschools and elementary schools this year presenting on the Stop Drowning Now curriculum, and we're out there. We're boots on the ground, getting the word out, getting the Water Watcher badges out, and getting people involved and making this more of a top of mind situation for families.
So one other, I guess, question I have with this, this goes from, kind of my experience as an educator talking to other educators, and I think that the curriculum from Stop Drowning Now is a huge piece of this. I'll share a quick story on my end. I was talking to a teacher in North Carolina once, and we were in Raleigh, so about 120 miles away from the shoreline. And it was in a year-round school, and I was meeting with him, and I said, "Oh, have you talked about water safety?" It was part of their state standards for certain grades, and he said, "Yes, I did an excellent lesson on rip currents." And I said, "You're 120 miles away from the shore, and this is middle of the summer. That's not the main risk for these kids." And I think that's a challenge for teachers who may not have the water safety exposure. So. I know you mentioned that Stop Drowning Now will be expanding their curriculum. Have you thought about any resources you'll be providing the schools or guidance you'll be providing teachers on how to incorporate or how to identify maybe their risk categories in their communities and educate their students along those lines?
Well, the curriculum is pretty comprehensive, and there's actually parts that it's a 22-hour curriculum that's set up right now. It includes water safety days, water safety weeks. It's age appropriate for K through 4 at the moment, but we are moving towards developing it into the later grades.
Sure. Joe, just because I'll go ahead and ask you, where can our attendees find out more information on the Safer 3 curriculum?
Safer 3 curriculum can be found on the Stop Drowning Now website. It's a pretty comprehensive education platform, and so we are doing webinars like this, doing educational training on how to teach it, how to present it. We can get it into the schools, and the more people that we can get in front of would be great. They can reach out to us directly through the website or any of our social media on our Facebook or Instagram and reach out to us directly. In New Jersey, they can reach out to NJ Swim directly, which is njswim.com, and we have a link right to Stop Drowning Now. And we also have information, to get back to your question before, how to reach out to your local assemblyman to get them on board and to help promote this bill so that it doesn't stall again.
Another question I saw come in, which I think is really important, is How how does someone who wants to support this legislation, whether, we have a number of people who I think represent their own nonprofit organizations or foundations who are joining us today, or may watch this video later, what can they do to help support what you're doing in New Jersey? Can they write a letter of support? Can they call? How can they jump in and assist?
I'll pass that over to the Assemblyman. He looks like he's got the answer.
Sure. I think that the best thing for them to do is to write to or go on to the New Jersey Legislature's website, which is www.njleg.state.nj.us. Again, that's www.njleg.state.nj.us. And then when you click on legislative leadership, you can correspond with any legislator. If the nonprofit is from out of state or they're subject matter experts, but maybe not an individual constituent, I would suggest writing to the Speaker of the Assembly, Speaker Coughlin, and the Senate President, Steve Sweeney, and forwarding their thoughts supportive of the bill. Again, I think the bill's a no-brainer. I think that as long as it's a priority for those of us who are sponsors in pushing it, and we have the support of advocates like yourselves, this is something for our kids, and it's something that if we're doing active shooter drills, if we're doing fire safety training, and that's part of our school's curriculum, it's just come to be expected, there's no reason that preventing drowning shouldn't be part of that curriculum. I think it's a layup. So writing to leadership and writing to individual legislators if they're constituents, I think that'll get this moving.
Excellent.
I'll jump in real quick on that. We actually have created a play-by-play right on njswim.com on Stop Drowning Nows to piggyback off of that, but it lays it out. There's actually a form letter on there that we can send out to our local assemblymen to help get them on the bill and get people involved.
Excellent.
I just have to drop off, and I wanted to thank all of you for your advocacy and appreciate letting me be part of this discussion.
Excellent.
And we appreciate it.
Time out of your day to join us. So one last thing on the New Jersey law that I want to ask, and then we'll kind of open this up to a full discussion on just legislative questions in general, and we'll bring Alan back into the mix. I know we've seen some other questions submitted. Joe and Kate, what would you say to someone who wants to replicate what you're doing in New Jersey in their state?
Sure. So they can go on the New Jersey Legislature webpage and they can search for the bill. It's A269, and that will show them the exact bill text and what we're doing here in New Jersey, and they could even use that as an example when contacting their representatives. Maybe if they have additional ideas or, however they want to do it, but that could just give them a very basic way to show other legislators what we're doing here in New Jersey.
Sure. Excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to ask Alan Korn to come back into the discussion. Alan, thanks for coming back and joining us.
Sure.
So one of the questions that I've seen submitted in, and I think this has been, Alan, I know you and I have had a number of conversations or along these lines over the years, but looking at what's been passed around the country in recent years, we've had BGB as a federal legislation. California passed their water safety bill a couple years ago, requiring additional layers of protection or barriers around residential pools at point of sale. Or new build or renovation of a pool. What else, and with the law now in New Jersey, what do we think is additionally possible for water safety legislation at, maybe the state level? I know each state has its own nuances and differences, what may be able to get passed, but also on a federal level. So, Alan, I'll start with you, and then I'll hand it over to our gang in New Jersey.
Sure. The upside on state legislation, I think, is threefold. Number one is there are still lots of states that do not have appropriate barrier legislation for private pools. And that is a possibility. We've got model legislation for barriers, self-closing, self-latching gates, covers, both mechanical and manual, that you can use. And when those that have experience in the state legislature, if you can go to a meeting and present to them model legislation with all the support behind it, then that's half the battle. You're going to make them look good and they're ready to go with it because they don't have to staff up too much to get something done. So number one is the barriers. Number two is, and this is something I'm starting to recognize, is the quality and characteristics of lifeguards around the country. These are summer jobs. These are not particularly qualified. They're, they're 17-year-old, 18-year-old. Sometimes they're looking through their sunglasses at the girls or the boys as opposed to the pool. I think there can be an extra level of training and characteristic and quality for lifeguards around the country. Not to mention recruitment. I think that's a problem also. And the final thing is kind of what New Jersey is getting into, is actually teaching swim lessons. Minnesota's got a bill that's pending, very similar to what you might see in New Jersey, about swim lessons, getting kids in public pools as part of their curriculum and their physical education. We always say at Abby's Hope, and others say it too, that learning how to swim isn't just a life skill, it's a life-saving skill. Unlike tennis and football and baseball and chess club, and all those things are great things and have great life lessons, but learning how to swim can actually and literally save your life. So those are the three things at the state level that I think are worthwhile.
Okay, anything you'd like to add in there?
No, thank you.
I have another question that I'll bring up, and again, with everyone's experience with legislation, this might be answered by anyone. I was actually talking to someone yesterday who was working on proposed legislation surrounding lifeguards in the state of North Carolina, and what they found very challenging, and this was trying to implement lifeguards at not just public pools, but also semi-private or semi-public pools, campgrounds, hotels, condominiums, apartment building pools, things like that. And what she shared with me, which I think we all know happens in the legislative process, but we don't really get to talk a lot about in the water safety side of it, is there was a lot of pushback from specific lobbying groups on one side, the apartment association, things like that, who obviously are representing their constituents who don't want to pay more for lifeguards, things like that. So, given your experience, because I kind of felt in the person's voice that there was a little demoralizing, showing up and trying to plead your case, and then you have industry lobbyists going against you. So how have you dealt with that before? What's been your experience, and what would you tell someone facing those groups?
Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I was going to say that, the funding happens in schools through parent organizations. We have in our district where my kids go to school, there's an organization and an education foundation where we do fundraisers to bring in extracurricular activities such as the Stop Trying Now curriculum or what have you, bike safety awareness days and things like that. So there are smaller groups that can help to support this from our level. I don't have the experience to talk on the national level of a lobbyist, but I can say that the funding, it would be a heavy lift in New Jersey to require that kids all have swimming lessons because not everyone has a pool or access to it, et cetera. So that's why Assemblyman Kean went the route of the dry land water safety training and awareness. And so that's kind of the reason. It was right in line with what we were producing at the moment. We hooked up and were able to support the bill and also hopefully provide some of the curriculum that we can use in New Jersey.
Alan or Kate, anything to add in on that question?
Yeah, lots to add. In fact, one of the sessions that we do at the NDPA each year, or at least every other year, is how to get involved in an advocacy effort. I'll only mention two things in my top 10 tips. Number one is don't ever, 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 ever underestimate the power of a mother or a father who has lost a child. If you can respectfully and with sensitivity engage them in the effort, it is a very powerful tool. And number two is these members of Congress or state legislatures, we saw that he had to drop off, are extremely busy. He said, squeaky wheel gets the grease. It can be said, the Lord helps those who help themselves. You want to be a dog with a bone. I mean, they go from swimming safety to kosher pickle regulations to concrete to stop signs. I mean, they have the spectrum from alpha to omega on issues. It is your responsibility, our responsibility, in partnership to stay on it. And it really means, it doesn't mean the loudest, sometimes it does, the loudest person in the room, but certainly you want to squeak, and a squeaky wheel gets grease. So you want to stay on it. They move on, you do not, I do not. You keep at it. Then I've got lots of others, but those are two things that come to mind right off the top.
I feel like you're speaking right to me, Alan. Thank you for that. That's so important. We've been working so hard with our publicity release and keeping it on the table and keeping it in front of the public, in front of parents as well as lawmakers as well. Especially here in New Jersey, we really have been pushing to get this legislation made into law.
Alan, I'm going to ask you a question that I think you're probably going to be able to answer specifically is, there was legislation proposed in the state of Florida this past year that didn't make it out of committee, to my understanding, and it was very similar to California's law requiring barriers around private pools or residential pools. One of the suggestions that was made, is I was part of the kind of advocacy work behind that law, was to, instead of the legislative process, go through the code building process and change the code requirements for new pools versus the legislation route. Could you speak to that, or which way might be better, or is there a difference between the two, what one may lack or one may gain you?
Yeah, there is a difference. A code regulating body, for the most part, applies to new pools or that are going to be constructed, or spas, or those pools that are existing that are going to be substantially, nearly completely remodeled. Then the code comes into place. That does not address the literally tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of existing pools in Florida. So it's a way to get a bite of the apple, but you ain't going to eat the whole thing. You're not going to be left with a core at the end. It's just one bite, a big bite, moving forward for new pools, and it is a way to go. As to timing, you know, some regulatory efforts and code-related efforts have taken years, and some legislative state efforts have taken years. So I don't really see a difference there. Maybe it's a little bit more manageable in the code process, but each one can take a long time, or it can happen very quickly. The Virginia Graham Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act happened in about 2.5 years. And, you know, there were disagreements. We had to compromise. You have to have a philosophy in lobbying. At least this is my philosophy. Other people do not share it, is don't let the pursuit of your perfect be the enemy of good, meaning I was always willing that if at the end of the day I could say kids are safer because of what we've done, I would generally be supportive of that effort. I didn't hang my flag in the fortress and said, it's this way or no way. Sometimes that might be appropriate, but in my experience, I rarely, if ever, use that. So, you know, it just takes a while. You got to keep at it. And it is sometimes demoralizing. And sometimes it's the old saying, you don't want to see sausage made, because then you'll never have a sausage sandwich again. I mean, it can be a little daunting. It can be intimidating. It can be demoralizing. But at the end of the day, it does work. Democracy does work, and you can get some good things done if you've got patience and skill on your side.
Excellent. Okay, well, we're coming down to the last few minutes here. Is there anything that anyone on our panel today would like to share? Maybe it's a point we didn't get to through the presentations or through the questions this afternoon that you'd like to share with someone who's an advocate for water safety, who is interested in legislation. I hear that all the time, that we need more legislative pushes, more regulatory pushes in drowning prevention and water safety. Is there anything you'd like to share that maybe we didn't get to today? Alan, I'll start with you and then go to Joe and Kate.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential out there in the states, and a lot of people want to get involved in state legislation. I am happy to help. I put my personal email and my personal cell phone number on there. Give me a call and I'll help you, and I won't charge you. How about that? We'll do it for absolutely free, just to get you started, whether or not it's a piece of model legislation, an example support letter for the New Jersey effort, a declaration of Water Safety Month, all the things that help get this on the radar screen of members of state legislatures and in Congress. I'm happy to help, and I offer that up, and please take advantage of it. I wouldn't offer it if I didn't mean it.
Excellent. Thank you, Alan. And you have a big heart offering your services. Joe and Kate, anything that you'd like to share today, maybe about something we didn't get to discuss with your legislation in New Jersey, or something from your experiences that may help our attendees and advocates on the presentation today?
Sure. I think that it's so important that people out there listening and realize that the education platform that's been developed and written for Stop Drowning Now is available to not just schools, but to small groups. We work with the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, the camps and preschools, and teachers as well as parents can utilize the information available and do these presentations, or even small groups or even play groups at home, to bring this awareness in small doses to children all over. So that resource is available to all, not just to the educators. So visit the website at Stop Drowning Now and to learn more, and we certainly help you along with it as well. Like Alan said, our services are available to the public, and we're here to serve. So we look forward to sharing that curriculum and getting that word out there, and hopefully we can move the needle on this.
Hi. So I thought I would just say the bill number again. So it's A269, and you can go on the New Jersey Legislature webpage, and you can see the bill history. You can read the bill. Also on the New Jersey Legislature webpage, there's an alphabetical listing of all the members. You can look up your legislators by putting in your town, and then you can find out who your state senator is and your state assembly people. And you can reach out to them. You can email them. You can call them and indicate your support for this bill.
Excellent. I think that'll close out our webinar today. We are right at the top of the hour. So I'd like to thank everyone at home for joining us today, and a big special thank you to our panelists for taking time and sharing your knowledge and expertise with our attendees. It's so great to be able to learn from what you're doing in New Jersey and what's been done with the Virginia Grant Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act to help inform others around the country. Please mark your calendars for our next few webinars. 2 weeks from today, on July 31st at 1 p.m. Eastern, I'll be joined by Mick Nelson with USA Swimming to discuss drowning statistics that they've been collecting and reporting on for over 10 years, and the role of commercial aquatic facilities in drowning prevention. On August 14th, we'll be joined by the National Safe Boating Council to discuss recreational boating safety. And then at the end of August, on August 28th, we'll be joined by Stop Drowning Now and Collins Hope for our Back to School webinar on water safety in schools. As a final reminder, or just an additional reminder, call for presentations are open at watersafetyconference.org for the 2020 National Water Safety Conference. That submission link will close down at the beginning of September, so take the next few weeks, and if you have a great presentation that you'd like to share with our attendees, please get that submitted. Again, that's watersafetyconference.org. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks everyone.